We are talking The Possessor. This one directed and written by Brandon Cronenberg, proving he's a chip off the old block. And this one stars Andrea Riseborough doing her best Tilda Swinton impression, Christopher Abbott, Jennifer Jason Leigh. Now this is a hard-hitting science fiction thriller, which you may be forgiven thinking is more of a horror film, but although it's not a horror film per se, although I would say there are sequences here are more horrifying than a lot of horror films that I have seen. So this takes place at some point in the near future, and there is a technology that has been developed that allows someone to possess someone, hence the title of the movie here. So their consciousness can go in someone else's body ultimately and take control. And this is used, at least in the context of this film, to do assassinations and then to pin the obviously the murder or what have you on whoever's body you've taken over. And then the consciousness is kind of pulled back to the originating assassin's body. And this focuses on Riseborough's character called Vos, who, you know, is the only kind of person that we see, but we get to know that obviously she's kind of well known within the circle as being pretty good at this sort of thing, and she has this family life that doesn't really know what she does and things like that. And we see a mission at the beginning of the movie that kind of goes off more or less without a hitch. But the main kind of bulk of the film is her possessing this guy who is dating the daughter of this Sean Bean's character, who is this CEO of this kind of large company, and the target is to assassinate him and the daughter. But things don't go quite all in order to plan here. Voss's character seems to be struggling to wrestle for control of the host's body with his kind of consciousness, and may not even be able to get pulled back into her original body, and a tussle for control leads to all sorts of horrific violence. So let's talk about what worked. This is an artistic thriller film, and it's very hard-hitting. I mean, as I understand, there's two cuts of this movie, and the uncut version features, you know, a lot more sex and violence, including erect male penises. I don't think that's necessarily needed for the story, but there you go. But what we see on screen here is very, very explicit, and there are a couple of sequences when murders are committed that the movie really shows you the horrors what one person can commit to another person's body, and without kind of glorifying it, without kind of making it seem fun, like a lot of kind of like, you know, horror movies, you get lots of kills and people say, oh, you know, it's fun and kind of inventive kills. This film, the kills are truly horrific and look like very, you know, obviously very damaging, very upsetting in a lot of ways. So it's a very hard-hitting movie in that respect, and the violence when we do see it is very realistic and will affect you, I think, or affect a lot of people. I think the performances here are excellent, you know, especially when we have characters that are kind of possessed, for lack of a better word, and we kind of see, you know, levels of you know, of different personalities kind of coming through. Despite Riseborough being the kind of our star, I suppose, in a lot of ways, and our kind of our main character, her on-screen persona is actually in this male body for, I would say, the majority of the time. Played by Christopher Abbott, so he really plays the Vos character probably for longer than Andrea Riseborough, to be quite honest. But the acting all around is excellent, and I have to say that you know, Brandon Cronenberg's obviously learned a lot from his father, and you do get that kind of that body horror influence come through. In fact, I would say this movie does have a lot of influences, including his father's work and things like Existans and that. And you know, it's a very kind of artistic film, as I've mentioned, in a lot of ways. The narrative is not hard to follow, although I feel like it's deliberately vague, which we'll come on to again in a minute, because I do feel there is a little bit of a missed opportunity there. So we don't know all the answers. We don't quite know this world, but you know enough to be able to kind of follow the story. And the movie does go at a slower pace, but I think it suits the film. And I think this story is intriguing. The kind of the idea of this technology, although it's working, it still isn't. But it's not a perfected technology here. So obviously things that aren't going quite to plan in it, and it's kind of messy as it's kind of going along. I do feel that the movie, if I had to kind of have a little bit of critiques of this film, the movie lacks a little bit of world building. We don't really know much about the world and the people in it. I mean, everyone just seems to be smoking, vaping for no, everyone's just vaping all the time. And it's just like one of these things that is just put in here and it's never really discussed. But more importantly, we don't really know about how well known this technology is. Because when I was kind of watching the film, I was thinking, is this technology well known? Could this be used in a kind of, a court of law? Or is this some secret technology that only this kind of one company knows about and is almost working in a kind of like black ops, so no one really knows about it? But we don't know, because the movie never really tells us the kind of the status quo of this world and kind of when it is, and we get a few hints to, obviously it's in the future, but we don't really know anything about who's hired the people for what reason. And you could argue that you don't need to know, and I appreciate that it's probably arguably the case in some instances, but I did think that it could have done a little bit of world building, especially with the technology itself, because I was just left wondering how many people were doing this, and how well known is it? Is there a defence in court if someone is murdered, and they sort of could they obviously there are physical things that happen to this to the host body, and it's like, is that going to get picked up? Again, none of that's really touched. Now, I did read that there are, even though there is an uncut version, there are some scenes that were deleted, and I wonder if that would have maybe put a bit more to it. I think some of the acts are a little uneven in regards to some of its pacing. I think the third act, at least the beginning of the third act, is somewhat convoluted, and the director here obviously wants to have somewhat of an artistic film on screen, and sometimes I think maybe gets a little bit too lost in his own vision in a way. But I do think it pulls it together again for the remaining of the third act. Overall, it's an excellently made film, which I think is elevated by solid direction, great performances, very hard-hitting violence and sexual imagery at times. And, it's certainly not a fun film, but it's a very affecting film. And I said it, in a way, this is more horrific than a lot of horrors I've seen. So I think if you are a horror fan, even though it's not strictly speaking a horror, despite the possession title, I think horror fans may still like this. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Decent film, and I'm looking forward to see more of Mr. Cronenberg Jr. So there you go, 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.